In this video, we will talk about a comparison between parliamentary and presidential system from chapter 1 of Indian Polity by Spectral Books under some key features. Number 1. Executive power. There is a dual executive, nominal and real in the parliamentary system. The president is the ceremonial head of state and the prime minister is the real executive, the head of government. Whereas in the presidential system, there is a single executive. The president is both head of state and head of government. In other words, the president singly heads the executive organ of the state. Second, formation of government. In a parliamentary system, the political group, whether it is single party or group of political parties that has won the majority in the direct election to the lower house of legislative, gets to form the government. This group selects the candidate for prime minister's post, and then the prime minister is sworn in or appointed as head of government by the head of states. It is the prime minister who then selects the ministers to work with him or her in the council of ministers, but the ministers are usually members of legislature. Even if someone from outside is chosen, he or she must be elected as a member of the legislature within a certain time. Whereas in the presidential system, the president is elected by the people and so is the assembly or the legislature, but separately. The president chooses his ministers to head his executive departments, but the president is the sole executive and the secretaries are his subordinates or assistants. They do not enjoy the independent status conferred upon ministers in the parliamentary setup. The president has a wide choice and can select anyone he thinks is right for the job, subject to a formal confirmation of one of the organs of the legislature. But these secretaries cannot be members of the legislature. Third, responsibility. In the parliamentary system, the principle of collective responsibility of the councils of ministers to the legislature is very important. A vote of no confidence by the popular house against the council of ministers, if passed, leads to the resignation of the ministry headed by the prime minister. Whereas in the presidential system, the executive is not responsible to the assembly or legislature, but is responsible to people through the constitution. It is a distinctive feature of the system that the president should owe his position not as in the parliamentary government to appointment, nor as in convention theory to selection by the assembly, but to the electorate at election time. The system establishes a stable executive which does not depend upon on the will of the legislature. The tenure of the executive being fixed, the policies enjoy greater continuity and can be carried out without fear. The acts of the president may, as in the United States, be declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. If the president persists in acting unconstitutionally, the legislature may take the action of impeaching the president or his aides to remove him or them. Fourth point, term of government. In a parliamentary system, in case of deadlock between the executive and the legislature on important issues, either the legislature may force the cabinet to resign upon a vote of no confidence, or the prime minister may call for the dissolution of the legislature and opt for a general election where the issues are decided by the people. So, the popular house of legislature or assembly can be dissolved before the expiry of its term, just as the executive can be removed at any time. Whereas in the presidential system, while it is true that the president may not be dependent on the assembly for his political survival, he is dependent on its goodwill for the furtherance of his policies. The budget, foreign programs, important appointments all require the acquiescence of the assembly. If, however, there is no agreement, the assembly may decide to take no action. It cannot replace the president. Likewise, the president cannot dissolve the assembly, neither therefore is in a position to coerce the other. There exists a mutual independence of the executive and legislative branches of government. Point number 5, separation of powers. In the parliamentary system, a separation of powers is to be seen only between this judiciary on the one hand and the executive and legislature on the other. But the executive and the legislature are not separate. The ministers are required by the constitutional provision to be member of the legislature. It is from the legislature that the executive is formed, and it is to the legislature that the executive is responsible. Whereas the presidential system is based on the doctrine of separation of powers and functional differentiation between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. It is customary in presidential states for the person to be separate from the legislature. Neither the president nor his aides may sit in the US Congress. Judicial review is virtually absolute. The Supreme Court has the power to interpret the Constitution. It is said that under this scheme, the three organs of state are on an even knee and conflicts are resolved through the system of checks and balances among them. Though in a presidential system, the executive cannot interfere in the proceedings of the assembly, still less dissolve it, and the assembly for its part cannot encroach into the province of the executive. In practice, the relations between the two, at least in the United States, is rather more subtle than the theory of the separation of powers and checks and balances would indicate. As head of the government and leader of his party, the president controls a large amount of patronage. Yet, in a very real sense, the assembly enjoys great importance, at least in certain matters. The president, despite the considerable authority allocated to him constitutionally, may be powerless unless the assembly grants him the necessary appropriations. If he acts unconstitutionally, the assembly may impeach him.